ahead and put the first slide up. What's that? You need more time. Okay. Do more impressions? Well, this is going to be sort of a strange thing because it is a sermon, but it's also in the context of this conference. And as I noted to Eamon and Catherine, that we've done a lot of talk about consciousness, but we haven't spoken a lot about conscience. Consciousness gets all the attention. Now, I noticed that John Vervaeke has some preacher skills because he loves alliteration. And we have, of course, the 4 P's of knowing, and what I received this weekend was the 5 A's of consciousness: awakeness, awareness, access, which is, I think, access memory. I don't have the videotape yet, so I'm going to have to go over that again. Authority and aspectuality. That's probably the one I'm weakest at. We're still working on the slides, but some of these slides you've seen before. How many of you were here for my talk earlier? Raise your hand. Okay, most of you, but not all of you. I spoke about a TED Talk that talked about consciousness, and there was the interesting story of a woman who had a stroke. And for those of you who like watching nerdy videos about cognitive science and psychology, you know that some of these illnesses can do funny things to our ability to perceive. And so they showed a woman 2 houses, and one of the houses, they were identical except one had flames coming out of it and the other did not. And they asked her if there was any difference between these houses, and she said no. But then they asked her which of these houses would she like to live in. And she pointed to the house without the fire. And, well, that's strange, because part of her saw the flames, but it was not her awake, aware part of her consciousness. And we talked about that. We talked about the fact that for a lot of our lives, we sort of sleepwalk. We go about our business. In fact, my grandfather was a rather famous sleepwalker. He used to tell stories of once there was so much snow in Grand Rapids, he actually went out the window of his house, went down the roof over the front porch into a snowbank and started walking down the street in the middle of winter. And you wonder, well, how on earth could you do that? Well, sleepwalking is actually a very strange thing. And it's sort of a semi-awareness. We would certainly say that a sleepwalker is conscious, but how much so? Now, conscience has some of that fogginess of sleepwalking. Conscience often has a sense of moral intuition. Some of us have very tender consciences, and some of us have consciences that have sort of been seared by the kinds of things that life throws at us. So conscience is sort of like moral intuition, and sometimes it can poke at us sharply when we cross a clear moral boundary, usually something that we've staked our identity on. I would never do this, and then we do it. Or maybe it's a relationship. Maybe we were looking for something and going after something, and then we violated a relationship, and we see the hurt in the other person's eyes, and it's that conscience that we have that suddenly we feel. Conscience, sort of like consciousness, gives us sort of a vague sense of navigation. We often have this implicit sense that if we follow our conscience, now of course those of you who've watched a lot of Jordan Peterson videos will probably think of Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket. Why did they name him Jiminy Cricket? JC, can't imagine what that might have meant, but sort of navigates us. And we have a sense that if we follow our conscience, it will navigate us to a good place. Now, a lot of what No slides? We can go without the slides if you can't get it up. Just tell me when you get it up and we'll get you to the right one. A lot of what this little corner of the internet is about is wisdom. And a lot of what the meaning crisis is about is the failure of sort of the generational inheritance of wisdom, taking what one generation learns, usually through questions over conscience and pains in life, and bestowing it to the next. One of the big things that I think has happened in Western culture is that our commercial interests have sought to tear apart the generations. And once the young are sort of divorced from their parents and their wisdom, they make easy marks for all the commercial enterprises that would really like to colonize them and sort of colonize them and put them in a pen and milk them for life, get them when they're young. And so, a big part of what I've seen, I see a light behind me, a big part of what I've seen John Vervaeke cultivate in his world is wisdom. How can we both get wisdom and walk in wisdom and give wisdom to others? Now, Jonathan, in the speech that he gave, I agreed. I thought that was one of the best talks I had heard Jonathan give, even though he was, thank you. So go to the slide that has Jonathan Peugeot on it. That's you know who he is? It says, conscience is a navigation towards the good. Beautiful. I thought the way John framed it was amazing, that this quest for the good, this desire for the good, sort of takes this combinatorially explosive world and collapses it into the glass, the cup, the water. But we do this all over the place, and I immediately saw the connection with when Jordan Peterson talks about we don't see things, we see opportunities and obstacles. And in that way, this world which is simply so full of everything can kind of collapse, and our attention is drawn to something, and suddenly everything comes into shape. And that leads to a process of trying things on, of reaching out to something to see, will this be good? Will this bring me good? This is, of course, also deeply embedded in one's culture, which is already deeply framed by successive generations of grasping after the good. Next slide. Now, again, some of you might think, well, is this a sermon? Well, yeah, look at this picture. This is, you can see Greece, and you can see what was called Asia Minor, where Ephesus is, and you can see Rome. These were some of the key places in the world in the first century. And what is happening in around the 40s and 50s and 60s is that little groups are forming, and they're having fights in synagogues, and they're splitting off, and there have been some Gentiles who have been a little curious about these Jewish people that are probably 8% of the empire, and so they were hanging out in synagogues. But if you think joining an Orthodox church is hard, where, a year and a half, well, if you're a man and you're going to join the synagogue, no anesthesia, my friends. Yeah. So you had a lot of men who were in the synagogue, listening, participating halfway, but when it came to, let's say, making the cut, they would draw back. And you have all of these people, some of them fleeing persecution, leaving Jerusalem, and they have the strange story of a man who they said rose from the dead. And his disciples talked about it, and even 500 at one time saw him. And it was very odd because they sort of recognized him but didn't, and more and more people would listen, and the stories would continue to persist. And some would say that, well, you can find this in Acts 13, that Jesus is alive, and Jesus is Israel's Messiah, and Jesus is Lord. And everybody, of course, believed that Caesar was Lord because Caesar was the conduit through which the beneficence of the gods would flow and bless the empire. And so you have all these small groups, and they're sort of looking for a path to good. And in that sort of gestalt, grasping after goodness that Jonathan talked about, they've laid their hands on this sort of Jewish thing that believes that the God of the Hebrews has come, and we killed him, but he walked out of the grave. And so Paul of Tarsus, who had his own very strange experience, has been traveling around to these places, and in every place he goes, he tells them that Jesus is alive, he rose from the dead, Jesus is Israel's Messiah, and Jesus is Lord. People get excited about that, and they're meeting in homes, and it's a little chaotic. In fact, it's a lot chaotic. And, well, because things sort of clump in this world, in some of the most important cities, groups are forming. And so Paul has been traveling around, and he went to Corinth and had a fight in the synagogue, and some left, and some who had seen him in the marketplace making tents gathered and listened to him, and they're gathering together weekly, and they're reading the Bible of the Hebrews in Greek, and they're sharing meals, and they're listening to these stories. But now Paul helped found this church in Corinth, and now he's moved on to Ephesus, which was the primary city in that area of the world. But if you look at the map, you'll notice, I got this laser thing, I like it, I got the laser thing. You'll notice that this is where a lot of the wealth of the Eastern Empire is. If you go down here, you get down to Egypt and North Africa, and that's where a lot of the grain goes to feed Rome, and all of this goes through here. This is, they didn't until much later carve a canal, but this is sort of like the Panama of the Roman Empire. And so Corinth is a place that everybody goes through, and all of the ideas, all of them are going through Corinth, and one of the things that they love is wisdom. Now, this has become a problem. You say, well, why would wisdom be a problem? Well, because there are many kinds of wisdom. And so Richard Hayes, who is, I think, one of the best New Testament scholars running around today, notes this, that wisdom has become one of the slogan words for Corinthians because, like everyone, they want to be successful in life. They want to have a good life, and so they've learned if you want to have a good life, go around, find the best ideas, find the best of everything, integrate it, and practice it, and you can have a good life. And in many ways, it's that good that they reached out initially to this story about the strange man who rose from the dead with all of its Jewishness and that strange thing. And so they're looking for the good. And so another slogan has come around the Corinthians, and it's the mature. And for those of you who know that funny Greek word telos, the teleoi, the ones who have arrived. This is a term that also appears frequently in the writings of Philo of Alexandria. I thought I'd put some nerdy stuff in this sermon. I don't usually do that, but I know there's a lot of people here who like reading old stuff. To describe those who had arrived at an advanced stage of spiritual insight and perfection. They've done the work. They've arrived. Now, securing the good in this world has been the pursuit of almost everyone all over the place at all times. And we admire perfection, and the Greeks looked for that incessantly. And so that's why we still read the Greeks, and we have all of their schools of philosophy. I think John Vervaeke is exactly right. Our philosophy departments and university are nothing like those schools. These were people looking for the good to live out the good. The Jews were looking for miracles. But the truth is, if you want to win in this world, if you want to have a good life, The best thing that you can have, you can't get, which is to be born to the right people at the right time and in the right place. And most of us didn't get that. But then to work hard and to keep an eye on your addictions and to not get sick and to use your brain to educate yourself and to take care of your body and to gain wisdom. Sorry, I forgot about the slides. Another one. There's the thing I was hoping you were looking at. Next slide. All right. I'll try and remember now. So for Paul, being this mature, being a spiritual grown-up is defined in terms of, you've heard it all the way through this service actually, for upbuilding the community. In terms of submission to God's will for service in the community, and in terms of pressing on towards conformity to the example of Jesus. Now, because I wasn't here preaching a couple of weeks ago when I preached on this at Living Stones, a little bit earlier in the chapter, Paul said this, and it's really the theme statement for the book of 1 Corinthians. For the logos, and I keep that in Greek because many of you know that word, for the logos of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. Now, if you read in your English Bibles, you won't see that word logos. They'll have like message or word, but that's a little too skinny. And those of you who are following this little corner of the internet know that logos is a really big word. And in John's a conversation so intense it might as well be psychedelic, somebody named it that, they focused a lot on the logos because there's this sense in which our word logic comes from it, but it's sort of an interpretive thread that takes multiplicity and gives it a rational order and a pathway to pursue. And so when I saw Jonathan talking about the good and having that pursuit of the good sort of frame and collapse, there's something that's very logos about that. Now, the cross already had a logos, which is why it was used. The logos of the cross for Rome was clear. The cross was an instrument of imperial torture. You crucified rebel slaves. If you watch that old movie about Spartacus, all of those crosses along the road, Rome was making a point. If you cross us, we'll not only kill you, we're going to strip you naked, spread you across, put you on the main highway for everyone to poke fun of you, and this is how we derive order from chaos. This is the logos of the cross in the Roman way. And I know you always hear me talking about Tom Holland's book, Dominion. Read his book, Dynasty. If you want to have a good vision for the Caesars, the ones who were on top, and how they kept order in the world and the disorder that was actually their lives. And so Paul says this. And so it was with me, brothers and sisters. When I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Well, that sounds strange. Well, why? Why in Corinth? Because Corinth is the nexus of the Roman Empire, and all the ideas are coming through there. And in Corinth, they actually had something like Wisdom Olympics. You'd bring the best speakers in from all over the world, and they would share wisdom and philosophy and how to live. And in fact, something of that was going on in the Corinthian church because Peter came through and people heard, wow, Peter's like the right-hand man of Jesus. And Apollos came through and others said, wow, Apollos, he just takes that Old Testament and clicks it into shape and it's amazing. And so you had all these little factions because now you had your apostolic Olympics. And Paul says, that's not what any of this is about. I came to you in weakness, with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. Now, he might be talking about miracles there, but pay attention to the main argument. We do not, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature. So now he's calling them out. But not the wisdom of this age, or the rulers of this age, and everybody knows who they were, but who are coming to nothing, which they did. No, we declare God's wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden, and that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. The beautiful, the smart, the powerful. Oh yeah, they're God's favorites, right? You can see because they're beautiful, smart, and powerful. That's the way karma works. Who got what they wanted out of life, they called themselves wise, and it was proven by their place atop the world. Just look at Rome. Now, this is the karmic, either implicit or explicit, where the good are rewarded for their wisdom and their moral performance, and it's proved by their rank in the world. And you can see a good amount of that in, well, you can read it in the book of Deuteronomy, but then you have the book of Job. So, Paul tells them, you see, the Corinthian church had been working their brand, sort of a nature religion, to become mature, to become complete, to become the ultimate. And they're having competitions with each other. And this is something, Paul says, something new has been revealed in the logos of the cross of Christ. That has always been there, but not terribly easily seen. And it was not clearly understood by the rulers of the world, or they would behave differently, because everyone knows how the Caesars behave. And then he says this, however, as it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. Now, again, well, first of all, there's a lot of debate about this quotation, because Paul uses quotations to sort of course, make his argument. And some think this is maybe sort of a working through of Isaiah 64 and Isaiah 65. Those are passages about this new creation. Some think it's actually closer to the Apocalypse of Elijah, which is a Jewish apocalyptic book. Origen had access to it, and he said it was from there, but we don't have access to the book anymore, so Origen may be right. Maybe they were riffing on Isaiah 64 and Isaiah 65. But when you read something like this, as democratic Westerners, it feels wrong. Because we all imagine we should all start from the same place. And yeah, I agree. Because it isn't fair that those who are born to the right people and born at the right time and born with the right looks and born to the right family, that they somehow are favored by the gods all over the world and the rest gets what's left. That is the logos of Rome, of the cross. But now think about what Jonathan said. And think about how love works. Because attention reveals. You attend to your love and your lover. Lovers see things that no one else can see. And you see that sometime, because you see a couple and it's like, what did she see in him? But she did see something. And it was that good. And you might look and say, oh, but she saw something, and it came together. And it was a revelation. See, it's love that moved Dante forward, as Jonathan said. It's the seeking of good through love that creates that framing thread. Almost a logos thread, realigning reality in a way, putting the Christians in a very different world than his or her majority Roman Empire around them. These are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. Now, all of this talk that we've been talking about Spirit, remember school Spirit. Because Spirit isn't just, I close my eyes and there's some download from above. It's revealed by God through the acts of Jesus on the cross. And it's absolutely insane that any of these New Testament books got this idea. Look at the Gospel of John. The second part of the book is the book of glory. And any Roman says, I know what glory is. It's a triumph. It's Caesar walking into Rome with a train of tens of thousands of slaves behind him and the booty of the ancient world. That's glory. Paul and John will say, glory is our master stripped naked, splayed on a Roman cross. It would take centuries before Christians would put up a cross in a place of honor. But these are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. For who knows a person's thought except their own spirit within them? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. What we have received is not the spirit of the world. You can see that in Rome. But the Spirit who is from God, so that we may understand what God has freely given us. What Jesus did and what he was doing, see, it's both. He destroyed and begins to destroy the Roman logos of the cross and replaces it with his own. A little while, we're going to hear, this cup is a new covenant in my blood. Jonathan mentioned yesterday, and he's exactly right. Why did all those sacrificial aspects of temples go away? How did the blood of Jesus replace in history the blood of how many animals around the world? But it did. In Jesus, the deep things of God are revealed. And they've always been there. The sacrifice of a mother for their child. Every woman brings a child into this world at the risk and sometimes cost of her life. The sacrifice of a father for his children. It's always been there. This is how communal life moves forward. Not scapegoating. I used to tell my kids a joke. People say, oh, your children are so well behaved. I say, yeah, I have this picture of a kid slightly older than my oldest and say, he's not around anymore, is he? That would be the Roman logos of the cross. Who voluntarily sacrifice for those who can't do for themselves. This is what we speak. Not words taught us by human wisdom, the wisdom of Rome, but in words taught to us by the Spirit of Christ, that we see demonstrated in the cross of Christ, explaining spiritual realities with Spirit-taught words. The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolish. I prefer my Messiahs uncrucified, thank you. People still think that today. And cannot understand them because they are discerning only through the Spirit. The cross will not become a symbol for Christians for a number of centuries yet. It will take time for that Roman logos of the cross to recede, but it did. In John, remember when Jesus says he must go so his Spirit can come? And it did. The practice of your well-being at my expense seems utterly counterintuitive if your religion is about getting from 0 to 100 with the most power, the best experiences, and the most success. It makes no sense. Having a child, bad strategy if you want to live your best life now. And then he ends it with this. The person with the Spirit makes judgments about all things, becomes a filter. Now there's a different good that they're grasping for. Now the world suddenly looks different, and all the fixtures of the world, that which is desirable, it's very different. But such a person is not subject to merely human judgments. For, and he quotes Isaiah 40 here, who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? And now he's quoting in Greek a text in Hebrew. This is the text in Hebrew, Isaiah 40. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who can fathom the spirit, ruach in Hebrew, of the Lord, or instruct the Lord as his counselor? Paul takes that verse and subtly changes spirit into mind. And then he says this, because he's just said, who can know the mind of the Lord, nous? And then he says, but we have the mind of Christ. It's from the cross. It's that transformation where suddenly, no, your well-being at my expense. The world is suddenly framed in a dramatically different way. Now, in a sense, humanity has been waking up from a murderous sleep. And this walking will continue as Christ's Spirit continues to move out into the world. What never would have pricked a Roman's conscience now bothers the sensitive moral atheist. It's the strangest thing. Jesus was successful. The logos of the cross was utterly transformed to the degree that people who would never identify as a Christian, their consciences are shaped by the Spirit of Christ. What a strange thing. Christ's logos of the cross has been rewriting our world. Now, I still have a lot of my well-being at your expense, sleepwalking, going on in my life. This is an amazing ideal. To live up to it, well, I often tell people, if you live like Christ, you will probably die like Christ. And then people say, that doesn't sound very good. I see what they put up on the walls. Paul says this in Romans, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. And as many have noted, the problem with a living sacrifice is it usually sort of crawls off the altar. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. It's the pattern of Rome. But be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Then you will be able to test, because then suddenly you're seeing differently. You'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will. Now, those of you who have watched a lot of my rough drafts know I always end with misery, deliverance, gratitude, misery, deliverance, gratitude. It's the structure of the Heidelberg Catechism. And I do it because it is very easy to listen to a sermon and say, I'm going to go out there and have the mind of Christ. And I say, amen, you go do it. Because what I know will happen is you will realize just how hard and brutal and difficult it is. And the more you have the mind of Christ, the more you will realize just how much you fail. And that is misery. But there is good news yet. And that is deliverance. Because we are not saved by our moral performance. We are not saved by our ability to really navigate our conscience. We're saved from what? We're saved from all the things that we want to be saved from. Paul says this in Philippians, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but rather made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a slave. Being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. That is the work he does for us. We really can't do that heavy lifting, so he does. But therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him a name that is above every name. At the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. There's the gospel story right there. The one who had every reason to exploit his advantages. No one was born better than him. But he makes himself a slave on behalf of people who are murderously walking sleepwalkers. And the gratitude part, because as a Christian, you don't live out of, I've got to do this or I'm not going to get it. Sometimes you feel like that. But it's fundamentally gratitude, where I don't want my children to obey me because they fear me or fear, I'm going to write you out of my will because, yeah, I've got big fat piles of cash that my children are going to inherit. Right, Jared? I want them to obey me because they love me. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, because that Spirit not only went out, but it binds us. Because when you find a community that has rewritten the logos of Christ, boy, a community where people put others ahead of themselves, wow, I want to be in a place like that. If any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. In a little bit, we're going to have this table, and I don't know exactly how we're going to be set up for it, but that is what's happening on this table. On the night he was betrayed, he took bread, and he broke it and gave thanks and said, all of you are going to die on my behalf like the legions of Rome. He said, this is my body, broken for you. Eat this in remembrance of me.